into the Russell Brown Show. Today, I'm going to interview none other than Jerry Ueslmann, the Jerry Ueslmann, an amazing photographer, but I think he's more of an artist, a surreal artist creating compositions in a darkroom with analog tools. Ay, 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 ay. We're gonna call him up. Let's have a chat with him. Jerry!
Hey!
1973, I'm graduating in high school. There was no internet. There was no searching for people. You had to find these artists and go to the library. What a concept. What a concept. And so I discovered you and followed your work, thinking to myself, I would never meet you any time. But there it was. We crossed paths, and I'm still being influenced by your work today. Who are the people who influenced you the most as you started off in the career of photography?
Well, there were several people who, in essence, answered my questions with more interesting questions. And in that early time period, who knew what photography was? It served so many purposes, documenting things, and the idea that it could be an art form was still being questioned by a lot of different people. But when I went on to get a master's degree at Indiana University, I had to take a lot of art history classes. And then I would see the work of Magritte and other artists, and I so related to those images that, there are ways in which their art became very personal. And I do believe, in simply speaking, the world exists within us as much as it does around us. And photographs do have a kind of inherent believability. And that was their initial purpose. You could show that this is what the pyramids looked like, that was a factual phenomena. But then when you create a photograph that shows another world, it adds an interesting psychological dynamic in that photography is inherently believable. I don't know, I got inspired. I mean, Minor White would have us photograph things not for what they are, but for what else they are. And that was an interesting concept to think about. And then I met other people, art historians. I had to take a lot of art history, and that was really challenging at first. But that showed me from day one that there are people who start with a blank canvas, in essence, and we start with a blank, we have light-sensitive material is what we're working with. And if you expand the concept that photography is light remembering itself, it's a definition that I threw out once during a lecture, and people liked that it is light remembering itself. And if you can get into another mindset, you have many options that were pushed aside initially because everybody thought the believability factor of the photograph was the key thing. But the photograph also shows levels of consciousness, I believe.
I noticed you worked with Ansel Adams and Imogen Cunningham. Did they influence you as much as Minor White?
I was pleased that when I first met Ansel Adams, we tried to talk, and he was so technical. He was I thought, well, I have my RIT background.
Oh.
And then, and then he asked me at some point, he said, well, what is the pH of your water? And I said, oh my God. I said, what, do you need a rectal thermometer to figure that out? And Ansel laughed. And from then on, we forgot trying to talk about photography. But Ansel and I became very good friends, and it surprised many people. But we related on human terms. We both had a good sense of humor, and we both liked to challenge people's thinking. But photography is a fluid medium that a lot of times things that are mistakes, like multiple exposures, is a wonderful thing that's unique to photography. And it suddenly brings several realities together. And I guess I became early intrigued by that. And then when I studied more about general art history, I began to see that phenomena occurring everywhere else.
I always love mistakes. They're the greatest thing that can happen in a darkroom or even on a computer.
Initially, cameras were designed so you could not multiple expose. Now, once you click the shutter, you had to advance the film. So it was a major breakthrough when you suddenly accept that, you can layer this image. You can try, not knowing ahead. That's my whole concept of post-visualization, because the dominant aesthetic in photography for years, and still is, pre-visualization, that when you click the shutter, that is your primary creative gesture. But in my case, it's a matter of collecting material. If you find something that you're interested in that appeals to you, it's very easy to take one picture. But if you get into the idea that everything you're trying to do involves creating art, there's a concept. That's a new, that's a burden, like you can't say. It's like me saying to you that, well, we've got this short video, let's just be profound. Why don't you begin? You can't just be profound. My whole floating figure thing, I have all these pictures where figures will be floating. That happened by accident because I had photographed jumping nude against a white background. And one day the contact sheets were set horizontal. And when I looked at, oh my God, I never realized if I put that horizontal, that person is floating. And then once I figured that, I shot rolls of film with just a person jumping and turning in different directions.
In my world of the computer world, which I shifted to quickly when it came along, I have too many choices, but I can put something aside. I can put an image, I can start an image, and I can put it aside and keep on looking at it. How do you do that in the darkroom? You can't start a print and know what it's going to look like until you develop it.
I spend a lot of times looking at contact sheets. Now, the contact sheets are sort of a visual diary of the things that you connect with. And one of the blessings of photography, you see a rock and you think, well, that's an interesting rock. But I didn't have to worry about, what does it mean? It was just, and the click of the shutter lets you hold on to that for a while. Then at a later point, I can consider how could I use that rock in relation to something else. And it's only long after the fact that people that have backgrounds in Jungian psychology and other areas realize the amount of symbolism that is associated with these images, that a rock can mean strength. It can be all kinds of things. And then when you have a rock that levitates, that adds a level of mystery. But life itself is one big mystery, and I'm living out the answer to that right now, because after I had a stroke a few years ago, my perception of reality has changed. But I have intersected with a few people that really gave me a way of thinking about the process that allows me to accept that challenge of, what else can I do with this? That's the creative process is really what else can be done with this. It's not just that one commitment.
I believe it takes more skill to work in the darkroom than it does in Photoshop. Now, this is pretty profound. I work for Adobe. I helped create Photoshop, but I believe you had more skill, this hand skill, this timing, this dodging and burning. Sure, I can pull them off. I think it's too easy in Photoshop. Do you have any thoughts on this?
I thought if the digital cameras had a device on that after you took 10 pictures, you had to wait 2 hours before you could take more. They would think a lot more about those 10 pictures. And that's the way it used to be. You had a roll of film, so you pondered before you made that initial exposure. And while you're doing that, you're relating to that. You're looking at this rock, let's say. And for me, you know, once you look at it, well, now I wonder how it would be if I move this way and where the shadow goes, or maybe if I shot down on it, that you use the photograph to explore visual options and not having to worry about, will other people like it? I say the big irony for right now is the most personal work I've done, which is very, very recent work, is the work that I feel closest to.
Let's talk about storytelling here, because I've recently, it took me, I'm 65 years old. It took me 65 years. I should have known this back in 1973. Storytelling. There has to be a story within the image. And I find, and I'm in the world of Instagram and Facebook, where I finish something in a day and I go, wow. I look away and then look back at the image and I post it to see how people respond to it. And so I have found that the story always wins. Speak to that. And I think that can be true of this first set of images, roots and trees and human forms in the image. And I see stories. Speak to stories.
Well, I think, in a certain way, life is a big story, and you don't know how it's going to end, and the things that happen along the way. I mean, I had this whole long thing with this one person that was writing about me, kept calling me a nature photographer at some point, and I was like, I think my work is so philosophical. But then suddenly, because she is a very bright person with a PhD, I began to look at my photographs and show me one of my photographs that doesn't have a tree in it. There's suddenly I have to realize that I have been very much attracted to nature, and nature by its very definition is so open-ended. What is nature? I mean, nature, and it's also the way we perceive nature. A lumberyard guy looks at trees in terms of how many houses he can build, but an ecologist looks at trees in a different way. And then you suddenly realize that, and the tree is such an amazing metaphor, the tree of life. It goes on and on. And so many people, the Jungians and others that would look at this, and people that are into spirituality, they find all kinds of ways to connect with this image. And that pleases me no end, because I don't have any hidden agenda of how I want people to respond. The idea that they do respond and have a personal response, the people that look at your work end up are the ones that you define those images on their own terms. And that's a great thing when you think about it. And forget the communication aspects, but the fact that you can create an image that evokes the feeling in someone, that is crucial to the way I work.
Let's talk about hands and boats.
I gradually realized that boats have become a metaphor for me as a spiritual journey. And when you think of it, most things involve, a boat floating. It's just that so much of life is a spiritual journey. And I'm not talking about organized religion. Minor White's last words before he died, that someone was with him in the hospital, he said, "There's a small boat waiting for me." Once you have that in your consciousness, the whole idea of a spiritual journey, because that's the important part of life, really. It's that emotional side. It's a matter of you allowing art to kind of flow through you in a way, to open yourself up to these possibilities. And photography, I think, in a way, lends itself to it because it's so easy to make these initial first steps. It's just the speed with which, things were done as opposed to the old days.
I remember seeing this image in my early days as well. I found myself relating to this image. Speak to that door.
The door is such an open metaphor, and my life is full of doors in a sense. And some people, this is the interesting thing, some people allow you to open these doors. And so it adds, in other words, we're almost how can I say, the possibilities of life are enhanced by the doors that you're willing to open. And
Yeah.
for some people, it'd be simply accepting, what medium ever you're working with. Whoever thought throwing paint at a canvas would produce something, but then someone else looks at it, finds a way of connecting. That's not a good analogy, but well, there's another thing. I forget who this quote's by, but someone said, well, I may not remember what we talked about, but I sure remember the way you made me feel. And this is the way my images, the way they make other people feel and make me feel is what is crucial. And it's like you can't just say, well, today I'm going to make if you want to say you want to make pictures that make me feel good, but you go photograph, ice cream cones, or I don't know, that's a bad example. But I have had people literally contact me and say, I'm going to Yosemite, tell me where the door in the rock is. So that's that inherent believability.
Yeah, believability. That's a topic to touch on. I found that if I make my images too believable, then it offends people to find out that they're not real. I found myself making things more unbelievable.
In a sense, reality is a concept. Look at us here. You're somewhere else on this earth right now as we're talking. And what is the reality? And
am I really here?
Yeah. And we're able to connect in this way because the other thing is we couldn't have done this with a phone call.
No.
And it's like there's just a visual impact. And when you create images, they have their own independent life. I've been amazed by people who come up to me and talk about one of my images and they find some whole personal way of relating to it. And I love that. It's like that they have found on personal terms a way of connecting.
An artist friend of mine, great photographer, he said to me once, Russ, he looks me, says, look me in the eye. Russ, nothing exists unless it's been printed on a piece of paper. None of your images exist. You don't exist unless it's on a piece of paper and it's on someone's wall, then it exists. You have any thought?
Yeah.
You must relate to that.
You're getting to a topic that I love, but it's very, very hard to talk about because I think, we have to talk about what does exist mean, that there's a factual thing here that, you relate to. And it's not. I mean, there's a basis on which we like the comforting fact that you can go and you can see, the Mona Lisa or whatever like that. But then at the same time, you see people today, they're going there and then they're with their cell phones, and it's like they're denying the actual experience of interacting.
Jerry, this conversation has been fantastic, eye-opening, refreshing. And so I just have to thank you so much for being you and influencing me and making me a better artist.
There we go.
Thank you for tuning into this episode of The Russell Brown Show. If you want to watch more great interviews like this one or discover amazing tutorials, then be sure and go to russellbrown.com. You'll find all my latest content at that location.